The shrill sound of the auctioneer's voice cut through the dusty air of Old Tucson, Arizona, in 1875, as Nora Blackett stood trembling on the makeshift wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. $20 for this fine young woman. Who'll give me $20? The crowd of rough-looking men stared up at her with hungry eyes, and Nora felt her heart hammering against her ribs as her stepfather, Edgar Yates, stood smugly to the side, counting the money he expected to receive from selling his dead wife's daughter. The summer heat bore down mercilessly on Nora as she struggled to maintain her composure. At 20 years old, she had endured 3 years of her stepfather's cruelty since her mother's passing, but never had she imagined he would stoop so low as to sell her like cattle to the highest bidder. Her honey-blonde hair fell in tangled waves past her shoulders, and despite the layer of dust coating her simple blue cotton dress, her natural beauty was unmistakable. $25, called a weathered old miner with yellowed teeth. 30, countered a red-faced cattle driver whose breath reeked of whiskey even from several feet away. Nora closed her eyes, refusing to let these men see her tears. She'd fought Edgar with everything she had that morning when he dragged her to town, screaming that she wasn't his property to sell, but her protests had fallen on deaf ears. The sheriff was out of town, and none of the townspeople had been brave enough to stand against Edgar Yates, a man known for his violent temper and underhanded business dealings. "I have $30 for this fine specimen. Who'll give me $35? The auctioneer's voice rang out again as the bids continued to rise. $100. A deep voice suddenly called out from the back of the crowd. A hush fell over the gathering as the men parted to reveal a tall figure moving purposefully toward the auction block. Vaughn Fletcher pushed the brim of his black Stetson up with one finger, revealing piercing blue eyes that were cold with fury. His trail-worn duster couldn't hide his broad shoulders or the confident way he carried himself, and the Colt revolver strapped to his hip wasn't missed by anyone present. $100, he repeated, his voice calm but carrying an underlying edge of steel. "And that's to end this disgrace immediately." Edgar Yates stepped forward, his thin lips curling into a greedy smile. "Well now, looks like we got ourselves a real bidder." "The bidding stands at 100. You misunderstand me," Vaughn interrupted, taking another step forward. His spurs jangled ominously with each deliberate movement. "I'm not bidding on this woman. I'm offering you $100 to walk away and forget this ever happened." The auctioneer looked confused, glancing between Vaughn and Edgar uncertainly. Edgar's face darkened. "Now see here, Cowboy, this is a legal transaction. This girl is my stepdaughter, and as her guardian, Vaughn cut in, his voice dropping to a dangerous timbre that made the crowd fall even more silent. "You're bound by law to protect her, not sell her like livestock." He turned to address the onlookers. "Everyone here is witness to a crime. Human trading was outlawed years ago, and what we have here is a clear violation of federal law." Nora stared at the stranger in disbelief, hope flickering in her chest for the first time since being forced onto that platform. Edgar's face flushed with anger. "You have no right to interfere in my family affairs. The law says I could have you in jail before sundown," Vaughn stated, resting his hand casually on his holstered gun. "Judge Morrison in Tucson doesn't take kindly to slave traders, which is exactly what you are right now." A murmur rippled through the crowd as several men backed away, suddenly conscious of their complicity in the proceedings. "This is outrageous," Edgar sputtered, looking around for support but finding none. Vaughn's eyes never left Edgar's face as he reached into his vest and pulled out a folded document. What's outrageous is that I happen to have here a federal marshal's letter authorizing citizens' arrest for violations of the 13th Amendment. He held it up for all to see. Now, you can take my $100 and leave town tonight, or you can spend the next 10 years in a territorial prison. Your choice, Yates. The auctioneer, sensing the dangerous turn of events, quietly stepped away from the platform. Edgar's face contorted with rage and fear as he calculated his options. The crowd waited in tense silence. "You'll regret this, Cowboy," Edgar finally hissed, snatching the money Vaughn held out. "She ain't worth the trouble she'll bring you." Vaughn ignored him and climbed the steps to the auction platform. Nora instinctively stepped back, years of mistrust making her wary even of her rescuer. "Miss, I'm not here to harm you," Vaughn said softly, his voice gentling in a way that contrasted sharply with the hardness he'd shown Edgar. He pulled a knife from his boot and carefully cut the ropes binding her wrists. "You're free to go wherever you wish. I only ask that you let me ensure your safety until we can be certain your stepfather has left town." Nora rubbed her chafed wrists, studying the man before her. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but his eyes held a kindness that seemed genuine. Still, experience had taught her to be cautious. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because no person should ever be treated as property," he replied simply. "My name is Vaughn Fletcher. I was passing through when I heard about this spectacle." He spoke the last word with evident disgust. "I'm Nora Blackett," she responded, finally finding her voice. "And I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Fletcher." "No thanks needed, Miss Blackett. Now, let's get you somewhere safe." He offered his arm with a gentlemanly gesture that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. By now, the crowd had largely dispersed, many men slinking away in embarrassment at having participated in the auction. Edgar Yates threw one last venomous glare at Vaughn before storming off toward the saloon, the $100 clutched tightly in his fist. Nora hesitated only briefly, before placing her hand lightly on Vaughn's offered arm. As they descended the steps, she felt the weight of stares from the remaining onlookers but held her head high. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the dignity her mother had always taught her to maintain. "Where will you go now?" Vaughn asked as they walked down the dusty main street of Old Tucson. Nora's step faltered. In the relief of escaping the auction block, she hadn't considered what would come next. I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to the house not with Edgar there. And I have no family left, no money of my own." Vaughn nodded thoughtfully. "The widow Parker runs a respectable boarding house at the edge of town. I can arrange for you to stay there while you figure things out." "I have nothing to pay her with," Nora said, shame coloring her cheeks. "Consider it part of your rescue," Vaughn replied with a slight smile. "No strings attached." As they continued walking, Nora noticed for the first time the curious glances from the townspeople they passed. Some looked away in embarrassment when she met their eyes, while others nodded respectfully to Vaughn. "You seem to know this town well," Nora observed. "I pass through a few times a year," he explained. "I drive cattle up from Mexico to the Northern Territories. Old Tucson is a regular stop on my route." They arrived at a neat whitewashed house with a small sign identifying it as Parker's boarding house. A plump, gray-haired woman opened the door before they even knocked, her kind face creased with concern. "I heard what happened in town," she said, ushering them inside. "Disgraceful business. Come in, child, come in. You look dead on your feet." Nora felt tears well up at the woman's kindness after so much cruelty. "Mrs. Parker led her to a small but clean room at the back of the house, promised a hot bath and a meal, and left her to collect herself. When Nora emerged an hour later, Scrubbed clean and wearing a borrowed dress that was slightly too large for her slender frame, she found Vaughn still waiting in the parlor, deep in conversation with Mrs. Parker. "There she is," Mrs. Parker said warmly. "Feel better, dear. I've set out some stew and bread for you in the kitchen." "Thank you," Nora said sincerely. "Mr. Fletcher, you didn't need to wait." Vaughn stood, his hat in his hands. "I wanted to make sure you were settled safely, and to let you know that I spoke with some of the merchants in town. Mr. Hollister at the general store could use help with inventory and serving customers. He's willing to meet with you tomorrow if you're interested." Nora was momentarily speechless. "You arranged a job for me, just an introduction," Vaughn clarified. "The job will be yours based on your own merit." Mrs. Parker nodded approvingly. "Hollister's a fair employer, pays on time and treats his help with respect." Nora felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be careful," Vaughn replied seriously. "Your stepfather took the money and stormed off, but men like him don't forget easily. Keep your wits about you until he's long gone from this territory." "Will you be staying in town?" Nora found herself asking, surprised by her own boldness. "For a few days," Vaughn answered. "I have some business to conclude before heading north again." Mrs. Parker gave Nora a knowing look that made her blush. "Well, Mr. Fletcher is welcome to take his meals here while he's in town. My boarding house might not be as exciting as the saloon, but the food is better and the company more civilized." Vaughn tipped his hat with a smile. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Parker. For now, though, I should let Miss Blackett rest. It's been quite a day." As he turned to leave, Nora stepped forward. "Mr. Fletcher," she called, making him pause at the door. "Thank you, not just for stopping the auction, but for seeing me as a person worth helping." Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of emotion quickly controlled. "Everyone deserves their freedom, Miss Blackett. I'm just glad I was passing through at the right time." With that, he settled his hat back on his head and disappeared into the gathering dusk. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in months, Edgar had forced her to sleep on a pallet in the kitchen after her mother died. Nora stared at the ceiling, turning the day's events over in her mind. The horror of the auction block still made her shudder, but she couldn't help dwelling on the mysterious cowboy who had appeared like something out of a dime novel to rescue her. There was more to Vaughn Fletcher than met the eye, she was certain. The way he had handled Edgar, the respect he commanded in town, despite being just a passing cattle driver, it suggested a man with a past. As sleep finally claimed her, Nora's last conscious thought was a determination to learn more about her rescuer before he rode out of Old Tucson and potentially out of her life forever. Morning came with the cheerful sounds of Mrs. Parker moving about the kitchen and the aroma of coffee and frying bacon. Nora dressed quickly in another borrowed dress, this one a faded green calico that Mrs. Parker had altered slightly during the night to better fit Nora's frame. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Parker greeted her warmly. "Sleep well, better than I have in years," Nora admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Parker handed her. "I can't thank you enough for taking me in." "Nonsense," the older woman waved dismissively. "Any decent person would have done the same. Though I will say," she added, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "not many would have had the courage to stand up to Edgar Yates the way Mr. Fletcher did. That man's got steel in his spine, he does." Nora sipped her coffee, trying not to appear too eager for information. "Do you know much about Mr. Fletcher?" Mrs. Parker placed a plate of eggs and bacon before Nora. "He's been stopping at my boarding house for about 3 years now, usually stays a few days each time he passes through with his cattle drives." She paused, considering. "Keeps to himself mostly, but always polite. pays on time, and never brings trouble to my door. That's more than I can say for most men in these parts." "He mentioned he drives cattle from Mexico," Nora prompted. "That's right. Has a small outfit, just him and a handful of vaqueros most times. They bring cattle up to sell to the army forts and reservations up north." Mrs. Parker refilled Nora's coffee. "There are rumors. Of course there always are, about a man who keeps his past close to his vest." "What kind of rumors?" Nora couldn't help asking. Mrs. Parker glanced toward the window before continuing. "Some say he rode with a ranger company during the war. Others say he was some kind of lawman down in Texas before coming west. All I know for certain is that he's fair in his dealings and doesn't abide cruelty or injustice." She patted Nora's hand. "Which is why I wasn't surprised to hear he stepped in yesterday. Now eat up. Mr. Hollister is expecting you at 9, and it won't do to be late for your first meeting." Nora ate quickly, her mind full of questions about Vaughn Fletcher. After breakfast, she helped Mrs. Parker clear the dishes, then prepared to head to the general store. "One more thing," Mrs. Parker said as Nora was about to leave. She pressed a small coin purse into Nora's hand. "Just a little something to tide you over until you get your first wages." "Oh, Mrs. Parker, I couldn't." "You can and you will," the older woman insisted firmly. "It's a loan if your pride requires it, but I won't have you walking around without a penny to your name. This town's safe enough most days, but a young woman should always have means to help herself if needed." Touched by the woman's kindness, Nora impulsively hugged her. "I'll pay back every cent, I promise." "I know you will, dear. Now off with you and hold your head high. You've done nothing to be ashamed of." The morning air was still cool as Nora made her way down the main street toward Hollister's general store. Old Tucson was coming to life around her shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, a wagon laden with supplies rumbling past, cowboys emerging bleary-eyed from the hotel after a night of carousing. A few people nodded to her, while others averted their eyes, clearly uncomfortable after witnessing yesterday's events. Hollister's general store was a large, well-maintained building with wide display windows, showcasing everything from tools to fabrics. A bell jingled as Nora entered, her heart pounding with nervousness. The interior was neatly organized, with shelves reaching to the ceiling packed with goods of all descriptions. A balding man with spectacles perched on his nose was carefully arranging a display of canned goods behind the main counter. "Mr. Hollister," Nora called softly. The man looked up and smiled kindly. "You must be Miss Blackett. Mr. Fletcher said you'd be coming by." He wiped his hands on his apron and came around the counter to greet her. "Daniel Hollister at your service. Nora Blackett, sir. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Well now, let's see if we might be a good fit for each other." Mr. Hollister gestured toward a small office at the rear of the store. "My last assistant left to get married last month, and I've been running myself ragged trying to keep up with everything." For the next hour, Mr. Hollister explained the duties of the position, keeping inventory, arranging displays, serving customers, and basic bookkeeping. Nora's mother had ensured she received a proper education before her passing, so Nora was comfortable with the mathematical aspects of the job, and her natural grace and good manners made her well suited to customer service. "When can you start?" Mr. Hollister asked finally. "Immediately, if you'll have me," Nora replied earnestly. "Excellent. We'll try a week to see how things go at 50 cents a day, and if we're both satisfied, we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." He extended his hand, which Nora shook firmly. "Welcome aboard, Miss Blackett." The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity as Mr. Hollister showed Nora the ropes. She learned where everything was kept, how to operate the cash register, and the store's system for tracking inventory. By the time the closing bell rang at 6 o'clock, Nora was exhausted but exhilarated. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt a sense of purpose and independence. "You did well today," Mr. Hollister told her as he locked the store's front door. "I think this arrangement will work out nicely." "Thank you for the opportunity, sir," Nora replied sincerely. As she turned to head back to Mrs. Parker's boarding house, Nora spotted a familiar figure leaning against a hitching post across the street. Vaughn straightened as she approached, tipping his hat in greeting. "Miss Blackett, I trust your meeting with Hollister went well." Nora couldn't suppress her smile. "Very well, thank you. I started working today and will continue tomorrow." "I'm glad to hear it." Vaughn fell into step beside her as they walked toward the boarding house. "No sign of your stepfather today. Word around town is he took the morning stage to Tucson proper." Relief washed over Nora. "That's welcome news." "Don't let your guard down entirely," Vaughn cautioned. "Men like Yates often circle back when they think the coast is clear." They walked in companionable silence for a few moments before Nora worked up the courage to ask what had been on her mind all day. "Mr. Fletcher, may I ask you something personal?" He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough," she acknowledged. "Why did you really help me yesterday? And don't say it's just because it was the right thing to do. Many people knew what was happening was wrong, but you were the only one who stepped forward." Vaughn was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tinged with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "I was born in Georgia before the war," he began. "My father owned a small farm, no plantation, nothing grand. We had 2 slaves, a man named Solomon and his wife, Mercy." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I was too young to understand what that meant, to own another person. I just knew they were always there, working from before dawn till after dusk." They turned onto the quieter street where the boarding house stood as Vaughn continued. "When I was about 12, my father sold Mercy. Just like that, separated a husband and wife because someone offered good money. I'll never forget Solomon's face that day, or the sound of Mercy's cries as they took her away." He shook his head, as if trying to dislodge the memory. 2 days later, Solomon hanged himself in the barn. Nora's hand flew to her mouth in horror. "That was my first lesson in what it means to treat people as property," Vaughn said grimly. "I swore then that if I ever had the power to prevent such a thing, I would. Yesterday on that auction block, when I saw you standing there with those ropes on your wrists, it was like seeing Mercy all over again." They had reached the boarding house, but neither made a move to go inside. The setting sun cast long shadows across the street as they stood facing each other. "I'm sorry for what happened to Solomon and Mercy," Nora said softly. "And I'm grateful that their memory moved you to action yesterday." Vaughn nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Mrs. Parker mentioned she's expecting me for dinner. Shall we?" He gestured toward the door, clearly ready to change the subject. Inside, Mrs. Parker had prepared a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. 2 other boarders joined them, a traveling salesman named Harris and a young schoolteacher, Miss Wilkins. The conversation flowed easily, with most of it centered around local news and harmless gossip. After dinner, while Mrs. Parker and Miss Wilkins cleared the dishes, Nora joined Vaughn on the small front porch. The evening air was cool and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "How long will you be staying in Old Tucson?" Nora asked, trying to sound casual. Vaughn leaned against the porch railing. "I'm meeting my men the day after tomorrow. They're bringing up a small herd from south of the border, and then you'll be moving on." It wasn't a question. "That's the way of it," he confirmed. The army at Fort Bowie is expecting delivery within the week. Nora nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment settling in her chest. It was foolish to feel this way about a man she barely knew, a man who was clearly not the type to put down roots. "I hope I'll see you again before you leave," she said finally, "to thank you properly for everything you've done." Vaughn turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "You don't owe me any thanks, Miss Blackett." "Nora," she corrected gently. "After what you did for me, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Nora, then, and you can call me Vaughn if you wish." The door opened behind them, spilling lamplight onto the porch as Mrs. Parker emerged. "Beautiful evening, isn't it? The desert cools off so nicely once the sun goes down." "That it does, madam," Vaughn agreed, straightening up. "I should be turning in. Early start tomorrow." He tipped his hat to both women. "Good night, Mrs. Parker, Nora." As he disappeared down the hallway to his room, Mrs. Parker gave Nora a knowing look. "He's a good man, that one. Not many like him left in these parts." "Yes," Nora agreed softly. "I'm beginning to see that." The next day passed in a blur of activity at the general store. Word had spread about Nora's new position, and it seemed half the town found a reason to visit Hollister's that day. Some came out of genuine need, others out of curiosity to see the woman who had nearly been sold at auction. Nora held her head high and treated each customer with the same polite efficiency, refusing to be cowed by whispers or stares. By closing time, she was exhausted but proud of how she'd handled herself. Mr. Hollister seemed equally pleased, complimenting her quick learning and calm demeanor under pressure. "You're a natural at this, Miss Blackett," he told her as they prepared to close the store. "I'd like to offer you the position permanently at $8 a week." "That's $1 more than I was paying Miss Jenkins, and well-deserved based on what I've seen these past 2 days." Nora was momentarily speechless. $8 a week was more than she had dared hope for, enough to pay Mrs. Parker for room and board and still save a little. "Thank you, Mr. Hollister. I accept, and I promise you won't regret it." As she left the store, Nora's step was lighter than it had been in years. The future suddenly seemed full of possibilities instead of dread. She was so lost in pleasant thoughts that she didn't notice the figure lurking in the alley beside the store until a rough hand grabbed her arm and yanked her into the shadows. "Thought you'd seen the last of me, didn't you?" Edgar Yates's sour breath hit her face as he pushed her against the brick wall. "Uppity little witch." "Let me go." Nora struggled against his grip, her heart racing with fear. "Not a chance," Edgar snarled. "You humiliated me in front of the whole town. And that cowboy friend of yours, he'll pay too." His fingers dug painfully into her arms. "I've got a wagon waiting at the edge of town. We're leaving, and this time I'll make sure no one interferes with what's rightfully mine." "I'm not yours," Nora spat, finding courage in her anger. "I never was. My mother would be disgusted to see what you've become." Edgar's face twisted with rage. He raised his hand to strike her, but before the blow could fall, there was a metallic click from the mouth of the alley. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Yates." Vaughn's voice was cold as steel. "Let her go. Now." Edgar's grip on Nora tightened momentarily before he shoved her aside, turning to face Vaughn. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy. This is family business." Vaughn stepped forward, his revolver steady in his hand. "I told you to leave town." "And I did," Edgar sneered. "But you didn't say I couldn't come back." Nora edged away from Edgar, moving closer to Vaughn. "He said he has a wagon waiting. He was going to take me away." Vaughn's eyes never left Edgar. "Is that right, Yates? Kidnapping now on top of human trafficking?" Edgar's hand moved toward his coat, but Vaughn was faster. "Don't," he warned. "I'd hate to have to explain to the sheriff why there's a dead body in this alley." For a tense moment, neither man moved. Then, slowly, Edgar raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Fine. Take the girl. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway." "Here's what's going to happen," Vaughn said, his voice level but authoritative. "You're going to turn around and walk to the sheriff's office. Deputy Tanner is on duty tonight. You're going to confess to attempted kidnapping, and then you're going to wait there until Sheriff Mills returns tomorrow." Edgar laughed harshly. "And why would I do that?" "Because if you don't," Vaughn replied, "I'll tell everyone in this territory about how you tried to sell your stepdaughter." "The territorial governor takes a dim view of slavery, Yates. You'd be looking at years in prison, not just a few months in the county jail for kidnapping." Indecision flickered across Edgar's face. Finally, he spat on the ground. "You haven't heard the last of me." He backed away, then turned and hurried out of the alley. "He won't go to the sheriff," Nora said shakily as Vaughn holstered his gun. "No, I don't expect he will," Vaughn agreed. "But he will leave town again, and this time he'll think twice before coming back." He looked at her with concern. "Are you hurt?" Nora rubbed her arms where Edgar's fingers had dug in. "Just some bruises. Nothing serious." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "I should have known he'd come back. I'll walk you to the boarding house, and then I'll make sure he leaves town for good this time." "No," Nora said quickly, grabbing his arm. "Don't confront him again. He's dangerous when he's cornered." She shuddered. "I've seen what he's capable of." Vaughn hesitated, clearly torn between ensuring her safety and respecting her wishes. "At least let me make sure Deputy Tanner keeps an eye out for him tonight." Nora nodded, relieved. "Thank you. Again." As they walked toward Mrs. Parker's, Vaughn kept scanning their surroundings, alert for any sign of Edgar. "My men arrive tomorrow with the cattle," he said after a while. "Once they're here, I'll feel better about leaving town knowing there are more eyes watching out for you." "Your men?" Nora asked. "4 vaqueros who work with me, Miguel, Javier, Carlos, and Tomás. Good men, all of them. They'll be staying in town for a day or two while I arrange final details with the army." They reached the boarding house without further incident. Mrs. Parker, alerted by Vaughn's earlier concerns about Edgar's return, had been watching for them anxiously. "Thank goodness you're both all right," she said, ushering them inside. "I've just made a fresh pot of coffee." Over steaming cups in the cozy kitchen, Vaughn explained what had happened. Mrs. Parker's face darkened with anger. "That man should be horsewhipped," she declared. "I have half a mind to go to the sheriff's office myself and demand he do something about Edgar Yates." "The sheriff won't be back until tomorrow," Vaughn reminded her. "But I'll speak with Deputy Tanner tonight, make sure he knows to keep an eye out for Yates." Mrs. Parker nodded, somewhat mollified. "Well, in the meantime, neither of you are going anywhere else tonight. I'll fix up something for dinner, and Miss Nora can help me while you keep watch, Mr. Fletcher." Nora spent the evening helping Mrs. Parker prepare a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and apple cobbler for dessert. Vaughn remained vigilant, checking the windows periodically and stepping outside once to scan the street. The other boarders joined them for dinner, filling the dining room with pleasant conversation that helped distract Nora from the day's frightening encounter. After dinner, while Mrs. Parker and Miss Wilkins cleaned up, Vaughn approached Nora. "I need to go speak with Deputy Tanner." "Will you be all right here?" "Yes," she assured him. "Mrs. Parker keeps a shotgun behind the kitchen door. We'll be fine." Vaughn looked impressed. "Mrs. Parker is quite a woman." "That she is," Nora agreed with a fond smile. "She reminds me of my mother, strong, kind, and not afraid to stand up for what's right." Something softened in Vaughn's expression. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Nora said quietly. "She taught me to read and write, to appreciate beauty in the world even when times were hard." She married Edgar after my father died. We needed the security, and he seemed decent enough at first, but after she fell ill." She trailed off, the painful memories still raw. Vaughn didn't press for details. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'll be back soon. Lock the door behind me." After Vaughn left, Nora helped Mrs. Parker finish the evening chores, then retired to her room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the house, every distant sound from the street had her sitting up, straining to hear if Edgar had returned. It was well past midnight when she finally heard Vaughn's distinctive tread on the porch, followed by Mrs. Parker's murmured greeting as she let him in. Nora slipped from her bed and cracked her door open, catching sight of Vaughn and Mrs. Parker in the hallway. "Deputy Tanner's going to keep an eye out," Vaughn was saying quietly. "And I spotted Yates at the stagecoach depot buying a ticket for the morning stage to Tombstone." "You're sure it was him?" Mrs. Parker asked. "Positive. He didn't see me, but I watched him hand over the money and take the ticket." Vaughn sounded relieved. "With any luck, he's finally realized he's not welcome in Old Tucson anymore." Mrs. Parker sighed. "I hope you're right. That poor girl has been through enough." Their voices faded as they moved toward the kitchen, presumably for a late cup of coffee. Nora closed her door silently, relieved by the news but not entirely convinced that Edgar would give up so easily. Still, knowing that Vaughn and others were watching out for her allowed her to finally drift into an uneasy sleep. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Nora dressed quickly in her newly acquired second-hand dress, a simple blue calico that Mrs. Parker had helped her purchase with her first day's wages, and headed to the kitchen for breakfast. Vaughn was already there, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as she entered, his eyes quickly scanning her face. "You look tired," he observed. "Trouble sleeping?" "A little," she admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Parker handed her. "But I feel better knowing Edgar's leaving town today." "My men should be arriving midday," Vaughn informed her. "I need to meet them at the South Road, but I'll be back by evening." A small pang of disappointment struck Nora at the reminder that Vaughn would soon be moving on. "Will you be leaving tomorrow, then?" "Day after," he replied. "We need to rest the cattle before the final push to Fort Bowie." Mrs. Parker set plates of eggs and bacon before them. "Miss Blackett has become quite the asset at Hollister's, from what I hear," she said, clearly trying to lighten the mood. "Daniel told me yesterday that his customers have doubled since she started." Nora blushed. "I'm sure that's an exaggeration." "I'm not," Mrs. Parker contradicted with a smile. "Half the unmarried men in town have suddenly developed an urgent need for supplies they could have purchased weeks ago." Vaughn's expression darkened slightly at this, a fact that didn't escape Mrs. Parker's notice. "Not that Miss Blackett gives any of them the time of day," she added quickly. "She's all business in that store. Isn't that right, dear?" "Mr. Hollister runs a respectable establishment," Nora agreed, stealing a glance at Vaughn, whose face had returned to its usual inscrutable expression. After breakfast, Vaughn walked Nora to the general store, insisting on seeing her safely inside before heading to meet his cattle drive. The morning passed quickly, with a steady stream of customers keeping Nora busy. Around noon, Mr. Hollister suggested she take her lunch break. "Go on," he urged when she hesitated. "I can mind the store for half an hour. Get some fresh air, you've been working hard all morning." Grateful for the break, Nora stepped outside, intending to walk to the small park at the end of the street where she could eat the sandwich Mrs. Parker had packed for her. As she turned the corner, a hand suddenly clamped over her mouth, and she was roughly dragged backward into a narrow passage between two buildings. "Make a sound and I'll slit your throat," Edgar's voice hissed in her ear. The cold press of a knife blade against her neck emphasized his threat. Terror paralyzed Nora as Edgar dragged her further into the shadows. "Thought your cowboy friend had run me out of town, didn't you?" he sneered. "Well, I'm smarter than that. I bought that ticket to throw him off the scent, but I never planned to be on that stage." He spun her around, keeping the knife at her throat. "Now listen carefully. We're going to walk nice and quiet to the livery stable where I've got horses waiting. One wrong move, one sound, and you'll be dead before your precious Mr. Fletcher can save you. Understand?" Nora nodded, her mind racing desperately for a way out of this nightmare. Edgar started backing toward the other end of the passage, pulling her with him. "Why are you doing this?" She managed to whisper. "Why not just leave me and start over somewhere else?" Edgar's grip tightened painfully. "Because you're mine," he growled. "Your mother left everything to you in her will, but as your guardian, I control it until you're 21 or married. I'm not about to let a year's worth of control slip away because some interfering cowboy got high and mighty." Nora's blood ran cold. For 3 years, Edgar had told her that her mother had left nothing, that the small house and parcel of land they lived on belonged solely to him. To learn now that her mother had provided for her, that Edgar had been lying all this time, filled her with renewed rage. "You're a liar and a thief," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "My mother would be ashamed." Edgar's face contorted with anger. He raised his hand to strike her, momentarily lowering the knife. It was the opportunity Nora had been waiting for. She ducked under his arm and ran, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Help! Someone help me!" She burst out of the passage onto a side street, Edgar close behind her. Ahead, she saw a group of riders turning onto the main street, 4 Mexican vaqueros and a familiar tall figure in a black hat. "Vaughn!" she cried out, running toward them. Vaughn's head snapped up at the sound of her voice. In an instant, he took in the situation: Nora running toward them, terror on her face, and Edgar Yates in pursuit, knife in hand. He spurred his horse forward, his men following close behind. Edgar skidded to a halt as 5 mounted men converged on him. Panicking, he grabbed for the gun at his hip. But before he could draw, Vaughn's lariat whistled through the air, settling around Edgar's shoulders and pinning his arms to his sides. With a sharp pull, Vaughn yanked Edgar off his feet. "Miguel, Carlos, secure him," Vaughn ordered, dismounting quickly and striding toward Nora, who stood trembling in the middle of the street. 2 of the vaqueros swiftly bound Edgar's hands behind his back, ignoring his curses and threats. A small crowd began to gather, attracted by the commotion. "Are you hurt?" Vaughn asked urgently, his hands gentle on Nora's shoulders. She shook her head, tears of relief filling her eyes. "You came back early." "Good thing we did," he replied grimly, turning to glare at Edgar. "This ends now, Yates." Deputy Tanner pushed through the gathering crowd, his hand on his gun. "What's going on here, Fletcher?" "Edgar Yates attempted to kidnap Miss Blackett at knife point," Vaughn explained, his voice hard. "My men and I intervened." The deputy looked from Vaughn to the bound and furious Edgar, then to Nora. "That true, miss?" "Yes," Nora confirmed, her voice steadier now. "He was trying to force me to go with him. He also confessed to lying about my mother's will. He said she left everything to me, but he's been claiming it was all his." Deputy Tanner's face hardened. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Blackett." "It's the truth," she insisted. "And there must be records of the will somewhere, probably with the county clerk in Tucson. She's lying." Edgar shouted. "She's always been a deceitful girl, just like her mother." Vaughn took a menacing step toward Edgar, but Deputy Tanner raised a hand. "I'll handle this, Fletcher. Yates, you're coming with me to the jail. Sheriff Mills will sort this out when he gets back tomorrow." He looked at Nora again. "You'll need to come by later to give a formal statement, Miss Blackett." "I'll accompany her," Vaughn stated, in a tone that brooked no argument. As Deputy Tanner led the still protesting Edgar away, the crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to offer Nora words of support and encouragement. It seemed that in the days since the auction incident, public opinion had shifted firmly in her favor. Vaughn introduced Nora to his men Miguel, Javier, Carlos, and Tomás, all of whom tipped their hats respectfully. They were taking the cattle to the holding pens outside town, they explained, and would return later for supplies. "I should get back to the store," Nora said, suddenly remembering her abandoned lunch break. "Mr. Hollister will be wondering what happened to me." "I'll walk with you," Vaughn insisted. "My men can handle the cattle." As they walked back toward Hollister's, Nora found herself trembling, the delayed reaction to her ordeal finally setting in. Vaughn noticed and gently guided her to a bench outside the barber shop. "Take a moment," he said kindly. "You've been through a lot today." Nora took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "I can't believe he was willing to kidnap me in broad daylight. He must have been desperate." "Men like Yates don't like losing control," Vaughn observed. "And you said he mentioned your mother's will." "Yes," Nora nodded. "He said she left everything to me, but he's been acting as though it was all his property since her death. If that's true, then the house, the land, it's all legally mine." "Once Sheriff Mills returns, we can look into it," Vaughn promised. "In the meantime, you're safe." Deputy Tanner may not be the brightest lawman in the territory, but he'll keep Yates locked up tight. They continued to Hollister's, where a concerned Mr. Hollister was just about to send someone looking for Nora. After hearing what had happened, he insisted she take the rest of the day off. "Good heavens, child, you've had enough excitement for one day," he declared. "Go back to Mrs. Parker's and rest. Your position will be waiting for you tomorrow." Vaughn escorted her to the boarding house, where Mrs. Parker received the news of Edgar's latest attempt and subsequent arrest with a mixture of outrage and relief. "That man belongs behind bars," she stated firmly. "Or at the end of a rope, though I suppose that's not Christian of me to say." "Christian or not, I'm inclined to agree with you," Vaughn said darkly. After ensuring Nora was safely settled at the boarding house, Vaughn went to check on his men and the cattle. He returned by dinner time, bringing with him a bottle of good whiskey for Mrs. Parker, for medicinal purposes, he explained with a wink, and a small package for Nora. "Just a little something I picked up on my travels," he said, somewhat awkwardly, as he handed it to her after dinner. Curious, Nora unwrapped the brown paper to find a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a star on a simple chain. "It's beautiful," she breathed, touching it gently. "The Navajo silversmith who made it said the star represents guidance," Vaughn explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "I thought, after everything you've been through, you might appreciate a reminder that even in the darkest night, there's light to guide you home." Nora was momentarily speechless, deeply touched by both the gift and the sentiment behind it. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice soft with emotion. "Would you help me put it on?" Vaughn carefully fastened the chain around her neck, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. The pendant rested just below her collarbone, catching the lamplight with a soft gleam. Mrs. Parker, watching from across the room, smiled knowingly before discreetly retreating to the kitchen to give them some privacy. "It suits you," Vaughn said, his voice lower than usual. Nora touched the star, meeting his eyes. "I'll treasure it always." For a moment, something unspoken hung in the air between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Then Vaughn cleared his throat and stepped back, the spell broken. "I should check on the men at the livery," he said. "They'll be bunking down with the cattle tonight." "Of course," Nora replied, trying to hide her disappointment. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "I'll be around," he promised. We leave the following morning for Fort Bowie. After Vaughn left, Nora helped Mrs. Parker with the evening chores, all the while conscious of the weight of the silver star against her skin, a tangible reminder of the enigmatic cowboy who had changed her life in just a few short days. The next morning brought the news that Sheriff Mills had returned to town earlier than expected. After breakfast, Vaughn accompanied Nora to the sheriff's office to give her statement about Edgar's attempt to kidnap her. Sheriff Mills was a grizzled veteran of the frontier, with shrewd eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened carefully as Nora recounted not only the kidnapping attempt, but also Edgar's confession about her mother's will. "Nasty business," the sheriff commented when she'd finished. "Yates will face charges for the kidnapping, that's certain. As for the will, I'll send a telegram to the county clerk in Tucson today. If there is such a document on file, we'll know by tomorrow." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nora said gratefully. "In the meantime," Sheriff Mills continued, looking at Vaughn, "I understand you and your men are headed to Fort Bowie tomorrow." Vaughn nodded. "That's right. We've got a contract to deliver 30 head of cattle to the Army." The sheriff stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "I'd appreciate it if you'd deliver a message to Captain Reynolds for me while you're there. There's been some trouble with Apache raiding parties north of here, and the Army should be informed." "Of course," Vaughn agreed readily. As they left the sheriff's office, Nora couldn't help but notice how people around town greeted Vaughn with newfound respect. Word of his role in stopping Edgar's kidnapping attempt had spread quickly, cementing his reputation as a man to be reckoned with. "You've become quite the local hero," she observed as they walked toward the general store. Vaughn looked uncomfortable with the notion. "I just did what needed doing. Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Nora pointed out softly. "You did, just like at the auction." He shrugged, clearly unwilling to accept her praise. "Will you be all right at the store today? I need to help the men prepare for tomorrow's departure." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Edgar's locked up and Mr. Hollister keeps a shotgun under the counter." Vaughn smiled at that. "Seems like the women of Old Tucson are well prepared to handle trouble." "We have to be," she replied with a small smile of her own. "Will I see you tonight? Before you leave tomorrow?" Something flickered in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or resignation. "I'll stop by Mrs. Parker's to say goodbye." With that, he tipped his hat and headed toward the livery, leaving Nora with a hollow feeling in her chest despite the morning sunshine warming her shoulders. The day passed slowly at Hollister's, each hour bringing Vaughn's departure closer. Nora threw herself into her work, trying not to dwell on the fact that by this time tomorrow he would be miles away, possibly never to return to Old Tucson. Around midday, Sheriff Mills entered the store, his expression serious. "Miss Blackett, could I have a word?" Nora's heart sank, fearing bad news. "Of course, Sheriff. Is something wrong?" "Not wrong, exactly," he replied, glancing around at the other customers before continuing in a lower voice. "I received a reply from the county clerk in Tucson. Your mother's will is indeed on file there. According to the clerk, she left everything to you, with your stepfather named as trustee until your 21st birthday or marriage, whichever comes first." Relief and vindication flooded through Nora. "So I was right. He's been lying to me all this time." Sheriff Mills nodded grimly. "Appears so. The clerk is sending a certified copy of the will by tomorrow's stage. Once we have that in hand, we can take legal action against Yates for misappropriation of your property." He paused. "There's more. The clerk mentioned that your mother's estate included not just the house and land, but also a sum of money held in the Tucson Bank, nearly $500. Nora gasped. $500 was a small fortune enough to provide her with security and independence for quite some time. "I've added these charges to those Yates is already facing," the sheriff continued. "Between the attempted kidnapping, the auction incident, and now this, he's looking at a significant prison sentence." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you what this means to me." Sheriff Mills tipped his hat. "Just doing my job, Miss Blackett. Oh, and one more thing, I ran into Fletcher at the livery, told him the news about your mother's will. Thought you'd want to know that." After the sheriff left, Nora moved through the rest of her day in a daze, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd learned. By closing time, she had made a decision, one that both terrified and exhilarated her. She hurried back to Mrs. Parker's boarding house, relieved to find Vaughn's horse still tethered outside. Inside, she found him in the parlor with Mrs. Parker, engaged in a quiet conversation that halted abruptly when she entered. "Nora," Vaughn said, rising to his feet, "Sheriff Mills told you about the will." "Yes," she confirmed. "It changes everything. I need to talk to you privately if that's possible." Mrs. Parker stood, smoothing her apron. "I just remembered I need to check on the bread in the oven. Take your time." She winked at Nora as she passed, closing the parlor door behind her. Alone with Vaughn, Nora suddenly felt nervous, unsure how to begin. "Sheriff Mills said you're still leaving tomorrow," she asked finally. Vaughn nodded. "At first light, the Army's expecting those cattle by the end of the week. And after that, where will you go?" He seemed surprised by the question. "North, probably. There's good grazing land in Colorado Territory. I've been thinking of buying a small ranch there, settling down." He paused. "Why do you ask?" Nora took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Because I've been thinking about my future, too. With my mother's inheritance, I have options I never thought possible. I could stay here, continue working for Mr. Hollister, maybe eventually buy a small house of my own." "That sounds like a good plan," Vaughn said carefully. "You'd be secure, independent." "Yes," she agreed. "But there's another possibility I've been considering." She met his eyes directly. "I could go with you." Vaughn went very still. "Nora, please, let me finish," she interrupted, afraid her courage would fail if he rejected her outright. "I know we've only known each other a few days. I know this might seem impulsive or foolish, but in those few days, you've shown me more kindness, more respect than any man I've ever known. You saved me, not just from Edgar, but from a life of servitude and fear." She took a step closer to him. "I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I'm suggesting a partnership, a chance for both of us to start fresh together. If you'll have me." Vaughn's expression was unreadable for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he laughed softly. "You know, I came in here tonight planning to ask you to come with me. Mrs. Parker was just telling me I'd be a fool not to." Hope blossomed in Nora's chest. "And what did you decide?" "That I'd be the biggest fool in the Arizona Territory if I rode out of Old Tucson without you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. He took her hands in his. "I can't offer you much yet. Life on the trail is hard, and that ranch in Colorado is still just a dream. But I can promise to respect you, protect you, and do everything in my power to make you happy." Tears of joy welled in Nora's eyes. "That's more than enough for me." Vaughn reached up to gently touch the silver star pendant at her throat. "There's something else you should know. When I bought this for you, the Navajo silversmith told me it was traditionally given as a betrothal gift, a promise of a shared path. I didn't tell you that part because I thought it would be presumptuous, given how briefly we'd known each other." Nora's hand covered his where it rested against the pendant. "It seems your heart knew what it wanted before your head did." "It seems so," he agreed with a soft smile. "Nora Blackett, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not here, not yet, but when we reach Colorado, when I can offer you a proper home. Yes, she whispered without hesitation. Yes, I will. The joy that spread across Vaughn's face transformed him, erasing the usual guarded expression and revealing the depth of feeling he'd been concealing. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her a gentle, tender kiss that held the promise of a lifetime. The sound of applause broke them apart. Mrs. Parker stood in the doorway, beaming at them, not even pretending she hadn't been listening at the door. Well, it's about time. I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you two in the root cellar to get you to admit your feelings. Vaughn laughed, his arm still around Nora's waist. Mrs. Parker, you're a shameless matchmaker. Someone had to do it, she replied unapologetically. Now, when are you planning to leave? There's much to be done if Miss Nora is going with you. Tomorrow morning, Vaughn answered. We need to deliver those cattle to Fort Bowie. Mrs. Parker nodded decisively. Then we have no time to waste. Nora, dear, let's get your things packed. And Mr. Fletcher, I assume you'll want to speak with Reverend Johnson before you leave. Vaughn looked questioningly at Nora. It's your decision. We could wait, as I suggested, until we reach Colorado. Nora considered for a moment. The proper thing would be to wait, to have a proper courtship and engagement, but nothing about their relationship had been conventional from the start. And the thought of traveling together unmarried, despite its practicality, didn't sit well with the values her mother had instilled in her. I'd like to be married before we leave, she decided. Not for convention's sake, but because I know what I want and I don't see a reason to wait. Vaughn's expression was a mixture of surprise and happiness. Are you certain? I don't want you to feel rushed. I've never been more certain of anything, she assured him. Mrs. Parker clapped her hands together. Wonderful, Mr. Fletcher, you find the Reverend. Nora, come with me. We need to see if my niece's wedding dress can be altered to fit you before morning. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Vaughn located Reverend Johnson, who agreed to perform a small ceremony at first light. Mrs. Parker enlisted the help of Miss Wilkins to alter a simple but elegant white dress that had belonged to her niece. Mr. Hollister, upon hearing the news, closed his store early to help with preparations, and offered Nora a wedding gift of store credit to be used whenever they returned to Old Tucson. Word spread quickly through the small town, and by evening it seemed everyone had found a way to contribute to the hastily arranged wedding. The hotel restaurant prepared a special breakfast to be served after the ceremony. The blacksmith's wife brought over a bouquet of desert wildflowers she had been drying for her own home. Sheriff Mills offered to stand as witness for Vaughn, while Mrs. Parker would do the same for Nora. That night, as Nora lay in bed for the last time as an unmarried woman, she could hardly believe how dramatically her life had changed in less than a week. From the horror of the auction block to the joy of finding love with Vaughn, it seemed almost like a dream. She touched the silver star at her throat, a tangible reminder that this was real, that tomorrow she would begin a new life as Nora Fletcher. Dawn broke clear and bright over Old Tucson. Nora stood in Mrs. Parker's parlor, wearing the altered wedding dress that fit her surprisingly well. Mrs. Parker had arranged her hair with small white flowers and draped a delicate lace shawl over her shoulders. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Parker said, her eyes suspiciously moist. "Your mother would be so proud." Nora hugged the older woman tightly. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Parker. You've been like a second mother to me." "Now, none of that," Mrs. Parker sniffed, dabbing at her eyes. "You'll make me cry and then my face will be all blotchy for the wedding. Besides, Old Tucson isn't so far from Colorado. You'll visit, and I expect letters every month telling me all about your new life." A knock at the door announced Sheriff Mills's arrival. "The Reverend's ready, and your groom is waiting," he informed them with a smile. "And he looks about as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." Nora laughed, her heart full of happiness. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting." The small wedding party walked the short distance to the white-steepled church at the end of Main Street. A crowd had gathered outside. It seemed half the town had turned out to witness the union of the woman they'd nearly lost to the auction block, and the cowboy who had saved her. Inside the church, Vaughn waited at the altar with Reverend Johnson. He wore a clean black suit that must have been borrowed, as Nora had never seen him in anything but his trail clothes. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard. But it was the look in his eyes when he saw her that took Nora's breath away, a mixture of wonder, joy, and love that made her feel like the most precious person in the world. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Reverend Johnson pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, bringing a cheer from the assembled townspeople. The wedding breakfast at the hotel was a joyous affair, with toasts and well wishes from everyone present. Sheriff Mills presented them with the certified copy of Nora's mother's will that had arrived on the morning stage, along with a bank draft for the money held in trust. "I've wired the Tucson bank," he explained. "They'll honor this at any territorial bank, and Yates won't be troubling you again. He's being transferred to Tucson to stand trial next week." By mid-morning, it was time to depart. Vaughn's men had the cattle ready, and the journey to Fort Bowie couldn't be delayed any longer. Mrs. Parker pressed a basket of food into Nora's hands, while Mr. Hollister provided supplies for the trail. There were tearful goodbyes and promises to visit or write. Finally, Vaughn lifted Nora onto her own horse, a wedding gift from his vaqueros, who had apparently been setting aside part of their wages for months to help their boss find a good woman. The chestnut mare was gentle but spirited, a perfect match for Nora's emerging confidence. As they rode out of town, the cattle drive moving slowly ahead of them, Nora looked back at Old Tucson one last time. A week ago, she had stood on an auction block in this town, her future bleak and hopeless. Now she rode beside her husband, her heart full of love and her path stretching bright before her. "Any regrets?" Vaughn asked, noticing her backward glance. Nora smiled, touching the silver star at her throat. "Not one. My only regret would have been letting you ride away without me." Vaughn reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "Then let's not look back anymore. Our future lies ahead together." Side by side, they rode toward the horizon, the dusty streets of Old Tucson giving way to the vast beauty of the Arizona desert. And though the journey ahead would not always be easy, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the heart of the man beside her. The journey to Fort Bowie took 3 days of steady travel. For Nora, accustomed to the confines of her stepfather's house and the small town of Old Tucson, the vast landscape of the Arizona Territory was both breathtaking and intimidating. Vaughn rode beside her whenever possible, pointing out landmarks and teaching her the basics of trail life. The vaqueros Miguel, Javier, Carlos, and Tomás initially seemed uncertain about having their boss's new wife along for the drive, but Nora quickly won them over with her willingness to learn and her genuine interest in their stories. By the evening of the first day, Miguel was patiently teaching her how to make proper trail coffee, while Javier offered tips on handling her horse over rough terrain. Each night, Vaughn set up a separate small tent for them, a modest distance from the main camp. Despite their newlywed status, He was unfailingly respectful of her need to adjust gradually to the intimacies of marriage. Their nights together were a sweet discovery of each other, tender moments of connection that deepened their bond with each passing day. On the afternoon of the third day, the stone walls of Fort Bowie came into view against the backdrop of the Kairikahua Mountains. The fort itself was less imposing than Nora had imagined, a collection of adobe and stone buildings arranged around a central parade ground, with a flagpole bearing the stars and stripes at its center. Captain Reynolds, a stern-faced man with a neatly trimmed mustache, greeted them at the gate. "Fletcher," he acknowledged with a nod. "Right on schedule as usual. I see you've brought company this time." His eyes moved curiously to Nora. "My wife," Vaughn said, and Nora couldn't help but notice the pride in his voice as he made the introduction. "We were married just before leaving Old Tucson." The captain's expression softened slightly. "Congratulations to you both. Mrs. Fletcher, you're welcome to enjoy the comforts of the officers' quarters while your husband and I conclude our business." "Thank you, Captain, but I'm happy to stay with my husband," Nora replied politely but firmly. A flicker of respect crossed the captain's face. "As you wish. The men will show you where to corral the cattle. Once they're counted and inspected, we can settle up." While the vaqueros drove the cattle into the forts holding pens, Vaughn delivered Sheriff Mills's message about the Apache raiding parties. Captain Reynolds listened gravely, making notes and asking detailed questions about locations and numbers. "This confirms reports we've received from other settlements," he said finally. "We'll be sending out patrols to the north beginning tomorrow." He glanced at Nora. "You folks planning to head straight to Colorado?" Vaughn nodded. "That's the plan. We'll rest here tonight, then start north in the morning." "I'd advise taking the eastern route," Captain Reynolds suggested. "It's longer but safer given the current situation with the Apache. I can provide a military escort for the first 20 miles if you'd like." Vaughn considered the offer. "I appreciate that, Captain. We'll take your advice on the route, but we can manage without an escort. My men know how to avoid trouble, and we'll be traveling light and fast without the cattle." The business with the cattle was concluded efficiently. The Army's payment in gold coins was carefully counted and secured in Vaughn's saddlebags. The vaqueros would return to their homes near the Mexican border, while Vaughn and Nora would continue north toward Colorado. That night, they enjoyed the relative luxury of a real meal in the fort's mess hall and the privacy of a small guest quarters. As they prepared for bed, Nora noticed Vaughn seemed preoccupied, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a subtle tension. "Is something wrong?" she asked, sitting beside him on the narrow bunk. Vaughn sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just concerned about the journey ahead. With Apache trouble brewing, it won't be as straightforward as I'd hoped for your first long-distance ride." "I'm not afraid," Nora assured him, covering his hand with her own. "Well, perhaps a little, but not enough to wish we'd stayed behind. I trust you, Vaughn." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "I promise to protect you, and I will. But there's something I should have told you before we left Old Tucson, something about my past." Nora waited patiently, sensing his struggle to find the right words. "I wasn't always just a cattle driver," he began slowly. "After the war, I rode with the Texas Rangers for nearly 5 years. We hunted outlaws, protected settlements, sometimes fought Comanche and Apache raiding parties." His expression darkened with memories. "I saw and did things that still haunt me. Eventually, I couldn't stomach it anymore and headed west to start fresh." "Is that why you knew so much about the law when you stopped Edgar at the auction?" Nora asked softly. Vaughn nodded. "The Rangers taught me a lot about the law, both how to uphold it and, sometimes, how it could be twisted to serve the powerful." He looked at her intently. I wanted you to know this about me. My time with the Rangers wasn't all bad. We did good work too, protected innocent people. But it changed me, hardened parts of me that I'm still trying to soften again. Nora reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered cheek. Thank you for telling me, but nothing about this changes how I feel about you. The man I married is the one who stood up for me when no one else would, who treats me with respect and kindness, who sees me as a partner rather than property. That's the real Vaughn Fletcher. Relief washed over his features and he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Yes, you do, she contradicted firmly. We deserve each other and the happiness we've found together. Morning came early at the fort, with bugle calls and the sounds of soldiers drilling on the parade ground. Nora and Vaughn prepared to depart, their saddlebags packed with supplies provided by the fort's quartermaster. They said goodbye to the vaqueros, who would begin their journey south after receiving their pay. Miguel slipped something into your saddlebag, Vaughn told her as they mounted their horses. Said it was a wedding gift from all of them, but you weren't to open it until we crossed into Colorado. That was kind of them, Nora said, touched by the gesture. Will we see them again? Probably, Vaughn replied. They're good men, loyal. I've worked with them for years. Captain Reynolds saw them off personally, providing them with a rough map of the safest route north and a letter of introduction to present at any Army outposts they might encounter along the way. The journey north was both challenging and exhilarating for Nora. Each day brought new landscapes from the rugged mountains and deep canyons of northern Arizona to the red rock formations and high desert plains of the New Mexico territory. They camped under the stars most nights, occasionally staying at remote trading posts or ranches where Vaughn knew the owners. Vaughn proved to be a patient teacher, showing Nora how to read the land, how to find water in seemingly barren places, how to track game, and how to stay alert for signs of danger. She absorbed it all eagerly, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. They avoided trouble with Apache war parties by following Captain Reynolds's suggested route, and by practicing extreme caution, no fires at night when in potentially dangerous areas, traveling during twilight hours when visibility was poor, and staying off ridgelines where they might be silhouetted against the sky. As they crossed into the Colorado territory 3 weeks after leaving Fort Bowie, Nora remembered the gift from the vaqueros. From her saddlebag, she retrieved a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. Inside was a beautifully crafted silver bracelet set with turquoise stones, along with a note in Miguel's careful handwriting. For the woman brave enough to tame our Jeef, may your home always be filled with laughter. It's beautiful, she said, showing it to Vaughn, who helped her fasten it around her wrist. They must have traded for it at one of the Navajo settlements, he commented, admiring the craftsmanship. It's high-quality work. I'll treasure it always, Nora said, deeply touched by the thoughtful gift. Your men seem more like family than employees. In many ways they are, Vaughn agreed. When you spend months on the trail together, facing danger and hardship, you form bonds that go beyond business. They had been traveling steadily northwest through Colorado, and now Vaughn announced they were getting close to their destination. There's a valley I found about 2 years ago, he explained. Good water, sheltered from the worst winter storms, plenty of grazing land. I've been buying parcels of it piece by piece whenever I had extra money from the cattle drives. The next day, they crested a hill and Vaughn reined in his horse, gesturing for Nora to look ahead. Below them stretched a verdant valley, with a clear stream winding through it. Stands of aspen and pine dotted the landscape, and the Rocky Mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped even in late spring. It's breathtaking, Nora gasped, taking in the pristine beauty of the place. "This is yours, ours," Vaughn corrected with a smile. "I own about 800 acres, stretching from that line of cottonwoods along the creek all the way to the base of that bluff to the west." He pointed as he spoke. "It's good land, rich soil in the bottomlands for crops, plenty of grass for cattle, timber for building. And there's a cabin." "A cabin," Nora repeated in surprise. "You already built a home here." "Just a simple one," Vaughn admitted. "I'd come up here between cattle drives, work on it a bit at a time. It's not much, but it's solid and weather-tight. We can expand it as we go along." They rode down into the valley, following a faint trail that wound through meadows bursting with wildflowers. After about 2 miles, they came upon the cabin nestled against a small rise, with tall pines providing shade and shelter from the wind. It was indeed a simple structure, a one-room log cabin with a stone chimney, a small covered porch across the front, and a lean-to addition that served as a stable for horses. But it was sturdily built, with a tight-fitting shake roof and windows fitted with oiled paper to let in light. "Home," Vaughn said simply, dismounting and helping Nora down from her horse. Nora stood for a moment, taking it all in. Then she turned to Vaughn with tears of happiness in her eyes. "It's perfect," she declared. "Absolutely perfect." They spent the remainder of that day settling and unpacking their few belongings, airing out the cabin, and preparing their first meal in their new home. The cabin's furnishings were sparse but functional. A sturdy bed frame with a straw tick mattress, a table and 2 chairs, shelves built into the walls, a cast iron stove for cooking and heating, and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. That night, as they lay together in their own bed for the first time, looking up at the sturdy log rafters overhead, Nora felt a sense of peace and rightness that she had never known before. "Happy?" Vaughn asked softly, his arm around her shoulders. "Beyond words," she replied, nestling against him. "I never imagined I could have this: a home, a husband, a future full of possibilities instead of fear." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the dim light of the banked fire. "Are you happy?" Vaughn's smile was all the answer she needed, but he put it into words anyway. "I've been searching for something most of my life without knowing exactly what it was. Now I realize I was looking for this for you, for us, for a place that truly feels like home." He pulled her close, his kiss tender yet filled with passion. "Yes, Nora Fletcher, I am very, very happy." The weeks that followed were busy ones as they worked to establish their ranch. They planted a small garden with seeds Vaughn had carried with him, built a proper corral for the horses, and began felling trees to construct a barn before winter arrived. Vaughn taught Nora how to hunt and fish, skills she mastered with surprising aptitude. Once a month, they rode to the nearest settlement, a growing town called Pine Creek, about 15 miles away, for supplies, and to post letters to Mrs. Parker and others in Old Tucson. On their third such trip, they returned with exciting news. The territorial governor had approved a mail route that would include their valley, meaning they would soon have regular postal service. Summer gave way to fall, bringing spectacular colors to the aspen groves and a crispness to the mountain air. By now, they had acquired a small herd of cattle, 20 head purchased from a rancher who was moving back east, and 2 milk cows that provided them with fresh dairy. Their garden had yielded a bountiful harvest, much of which Nora preserved for the coming winter. The cabin, too, had evolved. They had added a second room to serve as a kitchen and dining area, leaving the original space as a comfortable bedroom and living area. Vaughn had crafted simple but elegant furniture from the abundant timber on their land, while Nora had added touches that made the cabin feel truly like a home: curtains at the windows, now fitted with real glass panes ordered from Denver, a colorful quilt on their bed, wildflowers arranged in pottery vases. One crisp October morning, as they sat on their porch drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the valley, Nora turned to Vaughn with a smile that held a secret. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice casual despite the importance of what she was about to say. "We should probably consider adding another room to the cabin before spring." Vaughn looked at her quizzically. "Are you thinking of a proper parlor, or perhaps a guest room for when Mrs. Parker finally accepts our invitation to visit?" "Eventually, yes," Nora agreed. "But first, we'll need a nursery." For a moment, Vaughn didn't seem to understand. Then realization dawned and his coffee mug nearly slipped from his hand. "Nora, are you saying?" Her smile widened as she nodded. "According to my calculations, we should expect an addition to our family around late April or early May." Vaughn set his mug down with exaggerated care, then swept Nora into his arms, lifting her from her chair and spinning her around on the porch. "A baby," he said in wonder. "Our baby." "Our baby," she confirmed, laughing at his exuberance. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased doesn't begin to cover it," he declared, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. I'm overwhelmed, overjoyed." He placed a hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "When did you know?" "I've suspected for a few weeks," she admitted, "but I wanted to be certain before I told you. When I missed my monthly for the second time, I was sure." Vaughn kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For this gift, for our home, for everything you are to me." The news of their expected child added urgency to their preparations for winter. Vaughn worked tirelessly to complete the barn, to ensure they had ample firewood split and stacked, and to make certain their growing herd of livestock had adequate shelter and feed. Nora, despite his protests that she should rest more, was equally busy preserving the last of the garden's bounty, sewing warm clothing for the months ahead, and beginning work on tiny garments for their child. Winter descended on the valley with a series of snowstorms that transformed their world into a pristine wonderland of white. The cabin, with its thick log walls and stone fireplace, remained snug and warm even on the coldest nights. They settled into a pleasant routine, Vaughn tending to the livestock and hunting when weather permitted, Nora managing the household and working on her sewing projects. In the evenings, they would read aloud to each other from the small collection of books they had accumulated, or Vaughn would tell stories of his travels while Nora worked on her latest creation for their baby. As Nora's pregnancy progressed, her body changing to accommodate the new life growing within her, Vaughn's protectiveness increased accordingly. He insisted on handling the more strenuous chores, worried endlessly about her climbing the ladder to the small loft where they stored preserved foods, and made twice-weekly trips to check if the mail carrier had reached the designated spot at the valley's entrance, regardless of weather. "You're going to wear yourself out with all this fussing," Nora teased him one evening as he massaged her swollen feet by the fire. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "Can't help it," he replied unapologetically. Never had someone so precious to care for before. Their isolation was not complete, even in winter. Once a month, weather permitting, they would make the journey to Pine Creek for supplies and social contact. The small town had grown since their arrival in Colorado, now boasting not only a general store and post office, but also a small church, a schoolhouse, and even a modest doctor's office staffed by a young physician named Dr. Wilson and his midwife wife, Sarah. It was Sarah Wilson who confirmed that Nora's pregnancy was progressing normally and offered practical advice for the birth. She promised to come to their ranch when Nora's time drew near, a commitment that relieved much of Vaughn's anxiety about the impending delivery. Spring came early to the valley that year, with March bringing mild temperatures and rapid snowmelt. By April, the meadows were carpeted with wildflowers, and the first leaves were unfurling on the aspens. Nora, now in her final month of pregnancy, found herself both eager for and apprehensive about the birth. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she confided to Vaughn one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "My own mother died when I was 17. There's so much I never had the chance to ask her, so much I don't know." Vaughn took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her palm. "You'll be a wonderful mother," he assured her. "You have your mother's love inside you, guiding you even now. And we'll learn together, day by day." He placed his other hand on her rounded belly, feeling the baby's movements. "This child is already the luckiest little person in the Colorado Territory, having you for a mother." On the morning of May 3, 1876, Nora woke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. Vaughn, who had been sleeping lightly for weeks in anticipation of this moment, was instantly alert. "It's time," Nora told him calmly, though her heart was racing. "The baby's coming." With remarkable composure for a first-time father-to-be, Vaughn set their carefully prepared plan in motion. He helped Nora change into a clean nightgown and settled her comfortably in bed with plenty of water within reach. Then he saddled his fastest horse and rode at a gallop to Pine Creek to fetch Sarah Wilson. The labor progressed steadily throughout the day. Sarah arrived by mid-morning, bringing her experienced hands and calm demeanor to the birthing room. Vaughn alternated between pacing nervously outside and holding Nora's hand through contractions when she asked for him. As dusk fell across the valley, the first cries of their child filled the cabin, strong, indignant wails that brought tears of joy to both parents' eyes. "You have a son," Sarah announced, placing the swaddled infant in Nora's arms. "A fine, healthy boy." Vaughn stood speechless beside the bed, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife holding their child. The baby had a shock of dark hair like his father's, and when he briefly opened his eyes, revealed the same deep blue color. "He's perfect," Nora whispered, tracing a gentle finger along the baby's cheek. She looked up at Vaughn. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on a final choice. Now, looking at his son, Vaughn knew. "Samuel," he said softly, "after my father, Samuel Thomas Fletcher." Thomas had been Nora's father's name. "Samuel Thomas," Nora repeated, smiling down at their son. "It suits him perfectly." In the days that followed, they adjusted to life with their newborn son. Vaughn took over most of the ranch chores, allowing Nora to focus on recovering from the birth and caring for Samuel. He built a cradle from aspen wood, carving intricate patterns of stars along its sides in honor of the pendant he had given Nora on the day they met. Spring gave way to summer, and their small family settled into new routines. Samuel thrived, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. His first smile, at 6 weeks old, was directed at his father, and reduced the formerly stoic Texas Ranger to a state of delighted foolishness that made Nora laugh until her sides ached. On a warm evening in late August, as they sat on their expanded porch, now wraparound to accommodate the cabin's growth with Samuel sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them, Vaughn took Nora's hand. "I've been thinking," he began, echoing her words from the previous fall, "about how far we've come since that day in Old Tucson." Nora smiled, looking out over their prospering ranch. The barn was complete now, painted a cheerful red that stood out against the green of the valley. Their herd had grown to nearly 50 head of cattle, The garden was thriving. And most importantly, their home was filled with love and the sweet presence of their son. "It's hard to believe it's been less than 2 years," she mused. "Sometimes it feels like I've always been here with you, like this valley has always been our home." "And sometimes," Vaughn added, "I wake up and look at you and Samuel, and I can hardly believe this isn't all a dream, that I'm really this fortunate." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder. "Not a dream, just life as it was meant to be lived, with love, purpose, and freedom." She touched the silver star pendant that still hung around her neck, a constant reminder of their beginning. "From the auction block to this, who could have imagined such a journey?" "I knew," Vaughn said softly. "Not the details, perhaps. But the moment I saw you standing there, so brave despite your circumstances, something in me recognized what we could be together. I didn't just save you that day, Nora. You saved me too, from loneliness, from wandering, from never knowing what it means to truly belong somewhere with someone." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long golden rays across their valley, Nora and Vaughn sat in contented silence, their hands intertwined, their sleeping son beside them, their future stretching out before them like the vast, promising landscape of their beloved Colorado home. From the dark despair of the auction block to the bright hope of their mountain valley, their journey had been one of courage, faith, and abiding love. And though challenges would surely come, as they do in any life, Nora and Vaughn Fletcher would face them together, stronger for having found in each other the freedom and belonging that every heart seeks.